Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Gateway Spotlight, a series focused on current issues impacting international higher education in the United States and around the world. My name is Harvey Charles, and I'm the host of Gateway Spotlight. I've been in the field of international education for more than 30 years, having served as SIO and international education professor at multiple institutions across the U.S. Institutional risks facing colleges and universities have grown exponentially as globalization drives deeper and broader engagement with the world. Research partnerships, student mobility, emerging technologies, and geopolitical dynamics create opportunities but also present challenges that require thoughtful and strategic responses. Notwithstanding, the general posture of U.S. higher education is one that reflects a fragmented and in some cases, an even indifferent response to these new realities. In this episode of Gateway Spotlight, we will examine the evolving risk environment facing globally engaged universities and explore how institutions can move toward a more coordinated, enterprise-wide approach to international engagement. We will be joined today by three special guests who are ideally situated to address these issues. Dr. Hilary Link is a nationally recognized and visionary, dynamic, and entrepreneurial leader in the education sector. She became the 15th president of Drew University in July 2023. And at Drew, she has led a re-envisioning process to become a national model for the future of learning. Prior to Drew, she served as the first female president of Allegheny College, as a dean of Temple University Rome campus, and as vice provost at Barnard College of Columbia University. She's a founding member of the AIEA Presidential Ambassadors Council. Dr. Eddie Contreras is vice provost and for global engagement and SIO at Baylor University. He also served as SIO and senior diversity officer at the University of Portland. He has over 2 decades of experience advocating and advancing internationalization and inclusion in higher education. Eddie is also a member of the board of directors for the Forum on Education Abroad and faculty co-chair for the Harvard Management Development Program. And then finally, Dr. Anthony Ogden, who I believe is well known to most of you, is founder and managing director of Gateway International Group. He's a respected scholar practitioner with 30 years of experience in international higher education. He's held senior leadership positions at Pennsylvania State University, the University of Kentucky, Michigan State University, and the University of Wyoming. His most recent publications include Preparing Students for a Global World, Intercultural and International Competencies in Education by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, and Vanishing Voices, the Future of Language Learning in Education Abroad by Star Scholars Press. Before we begin, I'd like to share with you a brief word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Gateway's Enterprise Risk Management Solutions. International education has become an enterprise-wide issue, yet many institutions still lack a unified view of risk and opportunity. Gateway helps institutions assess and respond to risk while strengthening performance, resilience, and alignment. Gateway's Enterprise Risk Solutions assesses 4 functional areas. They include international students and scholars, international enrollment management, international partnerships and collaborations, and education abroad. And I invite you to visit the link in the chat to learn more about this. Okay, so now back to the show, and my very first question will go to Tony. As an international educator who has served at multiple institutions over the past 3 decades, you know more than most about the kinds of risks currently facing globally engaged colleges and universities. And so I'd like for you to share with us a brief overview of some of these risks and then explain why a more coordinated approach to dealing with them is so critical.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Charles. I really appreciate you inviting me to be here today. It's great to be with you as always, and thank you so much for hosting always so wonderfully Gateway Spotlight. It's also wonderful to be with our colleagues, President Link of Drew University and Dr. Contreras, who I've known for quite a long time at Baylor University. It's really great to be with you all, and I recognize so many people in the room today joining us, and thank you all for being here as well. Um, Folks, I have to be honest. Harvey did tell me to expect the first question and to come prepared, and I didn't. So, pardon me for that, Harvey. But I think your question is really important, and I don't know that I know more than anyone else, but I do know that the risks and the real and the perceived risk across higher education in the United States, in particular, is growing more complicated and it's becoming a lot more pervasive. I think there were for many years, many of us would be sort of siloed in our international education offices, whether it's a specific office like Education Abroad or International Student and Scholar Services, or even the entire International Programs Office itself, that we typically would look internally at our own processes and our own systems and structures, and we try to solve our things from within. But we knew, and we always have worked with units across the campus, from it might be legal counsel to review some program contracts, or it might be risk management to review our health and safety protocols. And most certainly, anyone in international higher education know that if you want to be successful, you have to work with and through the faculty. And so we've known the importance of working across. But I think because, and to your question, this past year in particular, we've seen massive geopolitical uncertainty. Every day, something is changing politically, it seems. Today and yesterday, lots of announcements. And then, of course, we know the imminent release of changes to duration of status is going to really throw us off balance here in the coming months, if not much longer. We're seeing massive regulatory changes and regulatory complexity, both in how we operate within the United States and across our programming and engagement around the world. We're also seeing economic volatility, and then and staffing constraints, among many other risks and challenges. And I think it's leaving a lot of senior leaders, and I suspect President Link will have much to say about this, but many of the leaders in looking at the governance of institutions are asking, gosh, I need to make some changes here in response to some of these challenges. And if I make a change here, how does it impact across the institution, across the context of our campuses and our institutions? And that we haven't as developed as great level of expertise on. And we can't always expect the leaders to understand the details that of funding challenge that happens in one place and how it impacts another. And so it's just really very hard. And I think those of us who are working day to day in international higher education need to start considering, if it's not that we haven't always done this, but we need to be even more attentive to enterprise, or the enterprise of the institution, the enterprise level concern. Um, because what we do now in international education, as we've always done, that cuts across campus units, it cuts across the entire governance of the institution, and we need to be very clear on looking at how those connections work.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I'd like to remind all of you as participants in this episode of Gateway Spotlight today about the Q&A portal. And I'd like to invite you to submit questions or comments in the Q&A portal. And at the end of the interview with our guests, I will look at these questions or comments and invite our guests to respond to them. So please keep this in mind as we go through this program. I'd like to direct the next question to President Link. As president of a globally engaged campus, you share with us can you share with us your institution's view on enterprise risk management? And might you even be willing to go one step further and discuss a risk of significance that Drew has recently faced, of course, without divulging sensitive information, and the offices that were involved in helping to develop an appropriate institutional response?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to Harvey and to Tony and to Eddie for inviting me. And hello to several of my colleagues who are also on the webinar. But, for me, this is a little bit like coming home in that this is my second university presidency, but I came up in higher education through being an SIO and through international education. I was a dean for study abroad. I was then a vice provost for international projects and programs. I then ran a campus in Italy. So global education is in my DNA, and I feel like I'm home. So thank you. The other thing I just want to say is that, and Harvey, you touched on this a little bit, but I say it all the time. I
Mhm.
think being an SIO and working in global education because of the enterprise-wide reach of the work is actually fabulous training
Yes.
for stepping into university leadership as a provost or as a president. There are actually a number of us former SIOs who have stepped into university presidencies because of the very thing you said, which is everything is connected.
Yes.
Um, and I have always believed that. And so, as president now, I will say Drew is a very different type of institution, for example, than Baylor or Penn State, where the enterprise is a massive bureaucracy and a massive structure. We are a very small residential campus, 45 minutes outside of New York City. We have, I always say, on a good day, 2,300 total students, about 1,700 undergrad, 300 grad, and 300 in our theological school. So enterprise-wide work comes easily to us because we are a small, agile, and very flexible, nimble, interconnected institution. So I would say that everything we do is enterprise wide. And I would say the biggest issue that we have really faced, Drew has a very large international student population. We are often ranked in the top 20 of international students. And obviously, over the past number of years, both before I arrived during COVID and also with a lot of the federal regulations preventing visa appointments and preventing students from many countries being able to come to the US, but also just kind of making people really question if they want to come to the US. That's been a huge issue for small institutions because while we have the benefits of being small and interconnected, numbers impact all of us on a much bigger scale. So, just very quickly, when we started understanding that international numbers were going to fall in the last several years, that impacted enrollment management, it impacted our campus life, our student services, our international services, our faculty, but also our finances, because every single student has an impact. And when you're looking at a drop of 5% of the students approximately, that has a ripple effect all across the institution.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that response. And I think there are many institutions that actually don't even think of international student enrollment as necessarily representing a risk. But so I'm really pleased that you have framed it in those terms. Um, Earlier in your comments, you also made reference to the fact that the role of the SIO provides really good training to enter senior leadership or university leadership positions. And we actually, I think it was our second or third episode of Gateway Spotlight this year. We actually had we focused on that very issue and interviewed two former SIOs who are now, one of them is a president and the other is a provost. So I think you're right on target with respect to that as well. And I just wanted to remind our participants today that they can access this earlier version of, or this earlier episode of Gateway Spotlight to get additional information on this. So thanks again. Eddie, I'd like to turn to you. You are at Research One University, Baylor, and I'm quite sure that Baylor is very often navigating a number of different risks that impact research collaboration in various parts of the world. And so I'd like for you to speak to this issue in general terms and share with us how a more coordinated approach can help deliver greater institutional compliance with federal and state laws. And could you also address how enterprise risk management can help ensure the integrity of the agreements that cover these research projects?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Harvey, with this good group of folks. One of the things that I emphasize, and I think Dr. Link put it quite well, is the nature of an SIO is to be involved across campus. And so we tend to be thinking across campus, across the silos. And I try and emphasize that, our goal as an office is not to be the bureaucrat that's always saying no, but our role is to serve our faculty, our staff, also to protect the institution from that kind of risk. And so when it comes to research, we're a very different institution from Drew. We have about 15,000 undergrads, about 5,000 grads, about 2,000 faculty and 4,000 or more staff. So it's a robust, large organization. The research component is central to what we do as an R1 university. And as we begin to see more and more, both federal and state, although we're private, we pay very close attention to state laws. We want to be in a position where we're still helping our faculty engage in partnerships with global colleagues at some of the best institutions around the world, while also maintaining compliance. So one of the things that we introduced last year out of our office is a campus-wide committee. Universities produce committees like hydras produce heads in medieval time, right? We have a lot of committees. And this isn't the most exciting or kind of compelling one, but it's a very important one that includes representatives from General Counsel, our Office for the Vice Provost for Research, includes our colleagues here in study abroad, international student scholar services. And that group is an international partnerships committee. And the goal is to sit with that group and see where our exposure is, to see where we're in compliance. And as we're moving forward with new agreements, to see how we can navigate the federal regulations that might limit us, say, from working with specific countries, right? There are certain countries that are very much on the naughty list, you might say, according to the federal government. And so we have to be careful to continue the relationships because it's what we do in terms of building those bridges, but also to be in compliance. We also have a university centralized risk management and compliance group, and their task is to consider that broadly defined across multiple areas. But I meet with that group regularly to discuss where our exposure is, where our risks are. And we also have somebody who works in our Vice Provost for Research office, who's the Director of Global Security and Research Safety. And so it's a cliche, but the communication piece is vital. Speaking across those silos is vital. And then when we do have to make decisions or where there are new regulations, we also will loop in, say, the Executive Committee of Faculty Senate so that they're also informed about research in particular.
Mm-hmm. Eddie, thanks so much for this. And it sounds as though you have a strategy in place. It sounds very much like that. And my hunch is that most institutions don't necessarily have this approach, at least being led from the Office of International Education. And so I'm really pleased to hear this. I'd like to raise an issue that I think many larger institutions, many research institutions might be faced with right now. And it kind of references one or two of the things that you've said. And that has to do with the hosting of international scholars and even supporting our own faculty in research collaboration with counterparts at institutions around the world. And typically, when we're doing this kind of work, we are the offices in our campuses that are involved would be Human Resources, the Office of the General Counsel, the Office of Faculty Affairs, the Office of Research, the Dean's Office, even, and of course, the Office of International Education. So, a lot of offices involved in supporting our faculty in doing their scholarship with colleagues abroad and in hosting scholars from other institutions in our own campuses. And so I'd like for you to share with us, and any one of you could actually respond to this, your own thoughts on how enterprise risk management can help the SIO navigate all of these regulations that might impact scholars from various countries, certain countries, as well as navigate all of these offices that might have a piece of or a bit of interest in supporting the faculty involved.
Well, let me start, if I may, Harvey. Thanks for that question and clarification. I think it's important also not to be stumbled by the words that we have on the background here. It's not just really risk management that we're paying attention to. It really is more understanding the enterprise of international education and really understanding where there are certain exposures. And to your question, understanding who is engaged or ought to be engaged is really very, very important. Eduardo started to say a moment ago how with partnerships, right now, partnerships are very important, especially given the changing regulations that he alluded to, and given the limitations on bringing the world's best and brightest students to the United States now. We're finding more and more schools are paying attention to other forms of partnerships and including TNE or transnational education, which, as we know, some countries like England and Australia and so forth have been they're pretty well advanced in that area, but the United States not as much. So as institutions are now considering other forms of partnerships and engagement across the world, to Eddie's point, how do you maintain compliance, especially in a world where that compliance is shifting constantly? So it would be naive to think that an international office could singularly be able to manage and navigate all of that complexity. So if you just even think a little bit about partnerships now, it is important to pay attention to what the Export Control Office has to say. What is your legal counsel paying attention to? What is your marketing and branding people thinking about? And in fact, I'm looking, and I don't mean to be shameless here, but I'm looking over at the Gateway website because there we map out some of those key offices that are important to maintaining compliance. Of course, legal review. How are your agreements managed over the time? Who is the signatories? How are international employees retained fairly and how are they compensated? There's so many questions that we could go on in depth on. And to try to answer those questions, you simply need to know who all of the stakeholders are and be sure that they are engaged, not only as gatekeepers potentially, but also as collaborators. And so I'm happy to hear about these committees that Baylor has formed. And Baylor's a large institution. It's going to be very important to get the right people at the right table. Maybe at a smaller institution, they may be working next door, but the reality is you have to be working with all of these offices, and it's increasingly fraught with problems. And the outcome is, if you're not compliant, you could lose your potential or ability to welcome international students and scholars. You'll lose certain privileges, really, if we're not. So I think it is high risk, but risk management is kind of a tricky part.
Yeah, in terms of what you could lose, Tony, you could also lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, from the federal government as well. So the stakes are actually quite high. Hillary, what are some of the practical outcomes that a more coordinated approach to enterprise risk management has had for university operations at Drew?
So, and again, I just want to point out, I do think things are so different when you're looking at a much smaller institution than a more diffuse R1 type of institution. And again, shouting out my global education colleagues from Drew who are on the call, but they're an office of two people. And they can't, to your point, Tony, they can't possibly know all of the risks in all of the different countries that our students are and faculty are traveling to or that students are coming from. They rely, and I love that you pointed this out, it is a huge partnership model, right? Whether that's partnering with our insurance company, EIIA, right, for their risk management, whether it's partnering with the provider that has hosted the kind of Drew specific program in London. And I would say, having run a campus, an American campus in another country, that one of the things we didn't really talk about, though, is that different sets of laws and cultural norms apply in different countries. So often you find yourself straddling two very different legal systems, cultures, etc. And when you're sending students to multiple countries all over the globe, that's impossible for one office, whether it's one person, two people, or 10 people, to manage. So in terms of kind of specific outcomes, I would say, again, being able to have access and be proximate to each other means that we can work creatively. I'm a big believer in the David Epstein's book Range, that you can solve big problems when you bring together people from lots of different viewpoints. And I'll just give you an interesting creative example. Our theological school, which is one of the 13 ordaining Methodist seminaries, is very small, but it kind of punches above its weight in terms of global reputation. And what's fascinating is that they have actually become the leader on Drew's campus in online education and moving curriculum and faculty outreach online, which sometimes seems counterintuitive, but it came out of international challenges because the theological school student population, again, all at the graduate level, they're coming from all over the world. We have a very strong presence in South Korea, strong presence in Africa, strong presence all over the world, and it's multi-denominational. But many of those people, even going back to COVID, right, couldn't get here, but wanted to access the same Drew education. So in their own kind of bare bones way, they started putting the curriculum online. But that too was a huge collaboration between the provost's office, our IT operation, financial aid, because it has impacts whether people are actually in the US, not in the US, our finance operations. So again, these are natural partnerships on campus that happen, I think, very easily at a small institution. And sometimes they have to happen much more intentionally when you're in a much more diffuse type of situation.
Thank you very much, Hillary. And I really value your presence here because risk, as we understand it, occurs on large campuses, on small campuses, on teaching institutions or research institutions. And I think all of us as SIOs, regardless of the type of institution at which we may be based, need to be concerned about this. So thanks again for that. Before we go to the next question, I'd like to encourage our attendees to post your questions or comments in the Q&A portal, and we will get to those as soon as we are done with the formal interview and try to respond to your concerns as best as we can. So, Eddie, could you talk to us about the costs associated with maintaining a robust ecosystem of enterprise risk management? Are these costs formidable? And if so, how might institutions maneuver to make such costs more manageable in light of the fact that we all now understand how critical it is to manage risks as an enterprise on our respective campuses?
This is such a good question. I don't know that there's a single university in the U.S. that's not thinking about their budgets right now. I mean, this has been a very challenging year in terms of meeting enrollment targets, broadly defined in higher education, and thinking about our budgets. How do we steward our finances in ways that make the most sense for our missions, whatever they happen to be? And when it comes to risk, there are significant costs, and I would lump them into two, like highly sophisticated finance terms: people and stuff. Those are the two buckets. So people are expensive, and stuff can also be expensive. And within stuff, I include software packages, insurance, and the lot, which all fall under the umbrella of risk. So when it comes to software packages, there are many software offerings out there for managing risk, right? For those folks on the call who are in ed abroad, they know what the packages are, and I won't mention them, but people know what they are, and we know that they're expensive. And so what we've tried to do is, with our tracking system for education abroad, we've partnered with other offices on campus that are also sending people out into the world. So we have a very large missions office. We have an office of engaged learning service that are sending people into the world. And so we try and bundle those costs so that we have one software package where we can keep track of all the people who are going out into the world. And we use that also for tracking our staff and our faculty who are out in the world. And so that, if you have multiple software packages and people are paying different amounts, that can get really expensive. And so to the extent that's possible, we try and use the same tool for anybody at Baylor who's going out into the world, whether it's through education abroad or missions work or engaged learning, service learning. That's one way to keep the cost down. Same thing with our insurance. Every year our director of global safety and research security will look at it and be in conversation with us to see that we're making that we're getting the most bang for the buck, so to speak, in terms of our insurance. That's something that we do on a yearly basis just to see where we are. In terms of the people bucket, this is something that I think is not so much about hiring more and more people, because most institutions don't have the money to just hire new people. For institutions that have offices of one or two, like Drew, often that's another hat that those people have to wear, is the risk management hat. One area of savings when it comes to people is making sure that the policies and the procedures are as streamlined and consistent as possible, so that you're not wasting valuable staff time reinventing the wheel or having the same conversation over and over again. That's a component that I fit into the people bucket of budget that just saves time. I mean, to have the same conversation around risk management is a waste of time. And often when you're in those rooms with folks from general counsel, OVPR, global engagement, those are valuable hours. And so to the extent that you can have processes that are streamlined and you can have open lines of communication, that helps keep the cost down in the sense that you're able to focus your work in other areas. It also helps keep the burden from offices that are overstaffed. I mean, I think in the field, there's a feeling now, especially in international ed, that we're feeling very overwhelmed, that we're overworked, that we have a lot on our plates. and not a lot of support. But if you can work with vice provost for faculty affair, research offices, if you're on institutions that have those units, that helps allow some of that responsibility to extend across units and relieve some of the burden off the soldiers or off the shoulders of the people who are in the international offices. I hope that addresses that really important
Yeah,
question.
it does. It absolutely does, Eddie. But I'd like to ask a follow-up, and that has to do with your efforts as SIO to drive a kind of more coordinated policy, a more strategic posture to enterprise risk management. And to the extent that you've been engaged in trying to do that, what has been the reaction of the various offices that have a stake in this whole issue of enterprise risk management? Have they been receptive to this? Have they been indifferent or not interested, or feel as though they're being bothered by you? Well, I'm curious to know, please.
This is something that differs from institution to institution, and I feel very fortunate here at Baylor to have a provost and a president who are on the same page and who are supportive of global education broadly defined. And I think because of their enthusiasm, because at every kind of major speech they mention our new university motto, which for years was pro ecclesia, pro texana, for the church, for the state. Just a couple of years ago, we changed it to include pro mundo, for the world. And so that that rhetoric really matters, especially when it's backed up by um, structure. And so I'm very lucky here that when I called all these very busy people to be on yet another committee, they were willing and they came and they have been engaged in meetings. And I remember after the second meeting, I asked some of my staff members, I said, people seem like they're really getting a lot out of this. Am I just making stuff up? And they said no. And so it's helpful to have that culture set by senior leadership. I've been at institutions where that hasn't been the case, and that's a much more difficult challenge to coordinate those groups, to ask of people to give their time. And in those cases, I found that you have to rely on the reservoir of goodwill that you build up just as a human on a campus where you're making those connections, where you're having lunch, where you're having tea, where you're making just the human connection to say, I know this is more work for you, but this is important for the institution. Would you be willing to be part of this committee? And if you've done it right, even if you're not getting that support from on high, you at least have another person, a colleague who's willing to work with you because you have built up a degree of goodwill. And that is much more complicated at a place where you don't have that kind of support. But even at a place where you have that kind of support, people are busy, and often the global component, especially if it's not in their job description, is something that's very different. And so part of the role of the SIO is being both the advocate and the educator, but also the person who's trying to get people on board. And it helps when you have support from the leadership, but you can do it when you don't.
Absolutely. Thank
Harvey,
you.
can I just jump in
Oh,
and
please.
echo a little bit of what Eddie is saying? And I think your follow-on question is really interesting, and I appreciate Eddie's response, and it's so very true. On the perhaps negative side of that is sometimes they may be willing, but they're not informed. If you remember some of the days in years past where an international student may ask some unit across campus a question and they say, oh, you're international, you have to go to the international office. And the same thing when various regulation changes would be made. If you remember years ago when Clarity Act was extended to international locations, a lot of us were caught unaware, and we would go to the various offices, and they were said, "Well, that's your job. You need to figure that out." And then more recently with GDPR, I remember as an SIO going to the legal counsel and I'm saying, "Look, I'm not quite sure what all of this means. Can you help me?" And their answer was, "We don't either. Good luck." And so sometimes the reception isn't always as positive as Eddie has mentioned, of course, and he made reference to that. But it doesn't mean that we should then go back and take it in on our own, because we simply cannot. We have to engage those offices, and developing that rapport is critical. And so I certainly echo what Eddie is saying.
Yeah,
And then
thank
if I may just add to that, and again, commenting about duration of status.
you.
When that change is announced today, tomorrow, or very soon, it will have far-reaching implications across the institution. We will have to work with academic degree programs and departments to look at how they're aligning a PhD program, for example. We'll have to look at admissions and how they are paying attention to yielding applicants. We're going to have to look at so many other units beyond the immigration office or the ISSS office. And here again, we need to make sure that we have that shared responsibility and shared governance.
Mhm. Great. And Tony, I'd direct the final question to you. And I think you may have kind of referenced this um, earlier in the show, but I'd still go ahead and ask it. Over the past 15 months, it's clear that higher education has become an important focus of the White House in ways that have had unfavorable repercussions for international education in general. And so I'd like for you to speak to some of the ways that university operations could be or might be compromised in the absence of a deliberate strategy in support of enterprise risk management. In other words, how could our institutions, our institutional interests be hurt, be disadvantaged by not taking seriously this need to kind of have a more coordinated and strategic approach to risk across the entire enterprise of the institution?
Well, I think we did talk a little bit about that, but I think the question is well placed here, and that is,
Mhm.
do we not have a unified policy? Well, I think that, frankly, and to be very provocative here, I think the government does have a unified approach to international education. It's just not one I like.
Yeah.
And that is impacting all facets of international education.
Mhm.
To put this in real terms, I had a provost from a well-regarded institution call me up recently and said that she has to cut several $1 million from her budget. And she wanted some guidance to think through how she could make those cuts. Because she, like many other provosts and presidents and others around the US right now, are anticipating that when we have our head count in early September, we will see expectedly that many institutions will have a dip in domestic enrollment and they will have a dip in international enrollment. Collective shared dip can be very, as President Link mentioned earlier, it could have real serious ramifications for institutions. And we're already seeing some smaller institutions struggling already. That coupled with these changes, for example, we're already knowing that I'm seeing through Gateway in particular, those who are engaged in international enrollment management are beginning to lose their jobs. When we see the dip in enrollment this fall, I think we're going to start seeing institutions asking, gosh, we had 130 international students last year. Now we have 25. Can we retain these staff? And I think, fortunately, education abroad is doing reasonably well across most institutions, if not doing better than in previous years. But I don't think the administration has yet started making comments on the portability of federal financial aid to education abroad programs, and I think that might happen. Not long story short, I think there are many risks of not paying attention to the enterprise level within an institution
Mhm.
in context of these greater geopolitical shifts and other things that we talked about earlier. I think it would be really foolish not to be paying attention. And it's hard. This is hard to grasp because every day the tenor changes, the tone, the message shifts. And so I think working with collectively with your stakeholders and your institution and across this wonderful profession that we all share, I think it's going to be really important that we do that because the risks are clear. Less money, less jobs, less greater fines and other things.
Great.
Can I just add one thing though
Yes,
to that,
please.
Harvey? I mean,
Yes.
look, I'm with you, Tony, on the financial risk. And for many, as Eddie said, every institution right now is having to reduce budgets. Small institutions without big endowments more than anyone. So for us, there is always a cost benefit analysis of anything. Studying abroad for me when I was at university changed my entire career life, everything. And yet I know that it's a cost to our university budget to send students abroad. So we are constantly balancing the benefit and the risk. And it shouldn't just be driven by finance. But the other thing I want to say is I think there is a huge risk to our campus climates and cultures when international students are either barred from accessing education in the US, or they simply don't think it's worth the cost, the risk, the political nightmare that it might be for them. And we have talked for many, many years about often, international students were full paying students. On many campuses, that's not even the case, right? I mean, we're funding international students to come, and they are a huge part of our academic culture, our campus culture. And I think that risk, even though that's not dollars and cents and it's not hitting the budget, but I think it's actually just as big.
Absolutely.
And that made me just one more thought here, Harvey, real fast. And thank you, President Link, for that. I think it's very, very important. I want to maybe just try to be a little positive. Where there is risk, there's also opportunity.
Indeed.
And just as there was, COVID was devastating for higher education in some ways, but it also opened up higher education in other ways, from online delivery and other forms of learning and engagement. I think that was really important. We don't want to lose sight of that. These days are also opening up some opportunities. And for example, just before this spotlight episode today, I was in a meeting with some colleagues that were hoping to form a partnership with an Indian institution to create delivery there. And I'm starting to see people are thinking differently about other types of educational partnerships, and Eddie alluded to it earlier. But those opportunities I think are real, and we need to be thinking very strategically and be innovative. I know President Link is at an innovation institute right now. I mean, we need to engage with those kinds of opportunities to be thinking creatively, because there is opportunity in all of this.
Well, and sorry, one more thing, just because you mentioned it, Tony, Drew is doing, we're leaning in heavily to reimagining what education looks like for a very uncertain future. But what I can say is that many of the global institutions are way ahead of us in terms of how innovative they are. They're standing up brand new higher ed institutions. They are reinventing themselves, and they seem much less confined than many US institutions. So I think that's an exciting opportunity for us to think about partnerships as well.
Yeah. Thank you
Harvey,
so much. And we're actually out of time, but a final word from our sponsor. Today's discussion is just the beginning. It is a given that every institution faces risk, but the real question is whether you're managing it with a comprehensive and enterprise-wide approach. And so Gateway's enterprise risk management solutions can help institutions assess and respond to risk while strengthening performance, resilience, and alignment. And so I invite you to visit the link in the chat to learn more. Thank you so very much to our guests, to Dr. Link, Dr. Contreras, and Dr. Ogden, and everyone who's joined us live. Visit the Gateway Spotlight page to watch past episodes and stay up to date on future Gateway Spotlights. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at a future Gateway Spotlight. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.